What's going on, family? I'm Scrapbook Boxing. I want to talk to you about conversations I had with my dad as we took car rides around Manhattan, because that's where the action was. And the purpose of those car rides was to take a look at venues that housed fighters, 1920s, 30s, 40s, and even the 50s. And a lot of these fighters came from the Lower East Side. They came from Midtown, Hell's Kitchen. And some of them even came from Harlem, New York. Now, the purpose of this video is to talk about the black fighters who were unfortunately mistreated during that time. But why I'm starting out with Stillman's Gymnasium, because you had a lot of great fighters who fought during that era. Now, Stillman's Gymnasium was a hot gym during those days. Why? Because Madison Square Garden, although it was on Madison Avenue, but it would relocate to 50th Street. As far as the conversation that I'm taking you to. So Stillman's Gym, as you can see, was on 919 8th Avenue to Manhattan. And you had loads of fighters there. Now, the man who would run Stillman's Gym, his name was Lou Stillman. Now, that wasn't his real name. He was a Jewish man who didn't even know anything about boxing. But he was a perfect person for the mob to control Stillman's Gym because he had a personality on him. He used to sit on a stool, have a 45 on his side. And he had a very strong personality. And you had to have one in order to control the fighters who would come into that gym. But you had great fighters who trained there. A fighter that I can think of, his name is Sid Barbarian. He was born April 15th, 1899. He weighed 135 to 136 pounds. He stood 5'6" and he was something else. He fought fighters such as Ever Hammer. Now, Ever Hammer was from Chicago. He was a lightweight. And Ever Hammer himself used to train at Stillman's Gym when he came in town. But in Chicago, you had some great lightweights. Ray Miller. You had Barney Ross. As I stated, Ever Hammer. You had Charlie White, many of them. And all those guys trained at Stillman's Gymnasium. But the problem with that gym, now, it would straighten itself out a little later on as you got towards the 30s and the 40s. 1920s, you didn't have any black fighters who trained at Stillman's Gym. Black fighters really were not allowed to enter Stillman's Gym. Now, in a moment, I'll take you up to where a lot of them trained in the 1920s. But you had another fighter by the name of Battling Dorsey Shamir. He was called the Williams Sport Flash. He was a lightweight champion of Central Pennsylvania. Now, he weighed 133 pounds and he stood 5'9". He was in the ring with fighters such as Kid Bailey, fought him several times. Young Sharkey, Young Dempsey, Joe Burton. But Battling Dory Shamir used to train at Stillman's Gymnasium. Now, another fighter who trained at Stillman's Gymnasium was Sammy Mendel. He was from Chicago. And Sammy Mendel was an outstanding fighter. He was born February 2nd, 1904 in Chicago. He weighed 130 pounds and he stood 5'6". And he would win titles. He was trained by Jack Blackburn for a short period of time. And he trained at Stillman's Gym. He was in there with Joey Sanglier and Joe Dillon. He was in there with Frankie Howell and Jack Wolf, Eddie Anderson, Eddie Kid Wagner. These were big names during his day. He also was in a ring with Dick Hope. Now, Dick Hope was another local fighter, fought him September 12, 1924. And he was in a ring with Jack Bernstein, November 7th, 1924. He would defeat him in 12 rounds. Speaking of Jack Bernstein, he was a junior lightweight champion. He was born in New York, November 7th, 1898, weighed 130 pounds, stood 5'4.5". He was a Jewish fighter. He was a phenomenal fighter. He also trained at Stillman's Gymnasium. It'll help if I show you some of these fighters. This is Jack Bernstein. And like I said, he was a Jewish fighter, and he was a junior lightweight champion. He was born in New York. But he trained at Stillman's Gym. Here you have Sid Barbarian. Talked about him. He also trained in Stillman's Gym. And he was born April 15th, 1899. He weighed 135 pounds and he stood 5'6". Good fighter. Now you had another Jewish fighter. His name was Sid Terrace. He was born in New York, September 16th, 1902. Now the thing with Sid Terrace, he had won 50 consecutive amateur competitions. He won a New York State Metropolitan, national, and international competitions, all within a period of 10 months. And he was in there with the who's of who of boxing. His most impressive victory, in fact, it was most, I would say, controversial, not victory, but situation that happened in the Jewish community in the Lower East Side. Sid Terrace had knocked out Ruby Goldstein in one round, the New York Polo Grounds. And this was a big deal in the Jewish community. As a matter of fact, it caused so many issues that the kids didn't go to school. They closed up shop in the community, the local merchants there, because it was mixed emotions between Ruby Goldstein and Sid Terrace. See, you didn't have Benny Leonard. He had moved away from the area a little earlier in his life. And so you had these fighters, but you also had Benny Vogel. You had many of them. But this was a big deal. It was better than a championship fight. You see, you had at that time those who lived in their own community. They had their own champions. The communities had their own champions. And Sid Terrace lived on one part of the neighborhood, and Ruby Goldstein lived on another part of the neighborhood. And it was mixed emotions. And that's the way it was during those years. Now, you had other fighters such as Paul Berlin-Batch. He was from Astoria, Queens. He wound up becoming a light heavyweight champion when he would defeat Mike McTeague. He was born February 18th, 1901 in New York. He weighed 160 pounds up to 170 pounds. He had a very good amateur record, but he was a decent light heavyweight. I think he had only a little under 50 fights in his career. You also had Spud Myers. Spud Myers weighed 135 pounds. He was born in 1902. He stood 5'5.5", and he was in there with the who's of who in boxing. Now, a lot of these guys trained in Stillman's Gym. But black fighters in the 1920s, now you had Eladio Valdez, who was black belt, and you had others, Kid Chocolate, early in his career, as far as moving, because a lot of his fights were in Cuba early in his career, but he would relocate to New York, and when he first got there, he was allowed to train in Stillman's Gym because of the manager he had. But a lot of the local black fighters, they couldn't train there. Now, a lot of those fighters during that time trained at Billy Grubb's Gym. It was located on 116th Street in Harlem. He had fighters such as Willie Ad Mackel. He was born January 19th, 1903 in Washington, D.C. He would relocate to New York. He would train in Stillman's Gymnasium. Now, Stillman's Gym has a lot of history there. And you had Harry Wiley Sr. He would train a lot of fighters in Grubb's gym. He had the thing about him where he was very protective of black fighters. He saw wrong, he wanted it corrected. He was a no-nonsense individual. Originally from New Jersey, and he would relocate to Harlem. We had the Salem Crescent Club. And a lot of black fighters trained at Grubb's gym. Many of them. One of the fighters that I most admire that trained in Grubb's gym, well, you had quite a few, but he was a middleweight. He was the Harlem New Yorker. And his name was the Harlem Thunderbolt, Harry Smith. Now, this young man was something else. Let me start out with, historically, some of the black middleweights who would either win the colored middleweight championship titles, or they were just great black middleweight fighters. You had Johnny Banks, Ed Bingley, Charlie Burley, George Byers, Joe Butler, Frank Craig, the Harlem Coffee Cooler. You had Eddie Palmer and Larry Estridge, Panama Joe Gans, Herbert Lewis Hardwick, Jamaica Kid, Sam Langford, Harris Martin, they called him Harris Pearl Martin, Charlie Turner, and Herman Williams. Well, you also had Panama Joe Gans. You had Jack McVeigh, who was known as the Pride of Harlem. And you had Harry Smith, who was known as the Harlem Thunderbolt. Now, the thing about Harry Smith, his name was Harold Anthony Smith, but they called him Harry Smith. He was also known as the Harlem Thunderbolt. He was born October 28, 1907 in Kingston, Jamaica. He died September 19, 1933 in Chicago, Illinois. He stood 5 foot, he actually stood 6 foot, 1 inch. He weighed 155 to 175 pounds. And he was managed by Dave Brown. Now, he had an amateur record of 65-0 with 55 knockouts. His only loss and defeat was on a foul before 1931. Harry Smith had fought and defeated names. These are really good names during his time, such as Homer Robinson, Black Ghost, Powell Reed, Panama Joe Gans, Italian Joe Gans. I'm trying to think of these guys. Sandy Garrison, William Gorilla Jones, Dynamite Jackson, Powell Silvers. His biggest fight was with Jack McVeigh, who was known as the Harlem, the Pride of Harlem. His real name was Julius Williams. And the thing with Jack McVeigh, he almost had a title shot with Harry Greb. Harry Greb tried to get a shot with Jack McVeigh, and they told Harry Greb that if you fought this black man on Independence Day, you will be arrested. We would charge you. Now, there was no grounds for him to be arrested, but that's the way it was during that time. And all credits go to Harry Greb. He gave most shots to black fighters during that time. And Harry Smith was going to, in fact, got an offer to go to the 1928 Olympic, and he turned it down because of the racism that took place during those years. Now, he wanted to be a fighter. His father wanted him to be a dentist. His father owned real estate in Harlem, taxi cab and limousine business. But this man can fight, man. He could punch like Julian Jackson. He could really, really do a number on you. Well, he became the colored middleweight champion in 1929 when he would take on the Pride of Harlem, Jack McVeigh, and that was some fight. But he would train in preparation for that fight at Grubb's gym. And Grubb's gym was the house for black fighters. Well, you had all races there, but That's what most of the black fighters during that time would train. William Gorilla Jones, the Fighting Gorilla. You had Eddie Palmer. You had Harry Smith. You had Jack McVeigh. You would have Larry Estridge. All these guys trained at Grubb's gym. And then, of course, you would have Ray Robinson later on in years. You had Spider Valentine. You had Harry Bobo. You had so many. George Godfrey, who was also trained by Jack Blackburn for a short period of time. He trained there. Obie Walker, many of them. And towards the end of the career of Harry Wills and Harry Smith, before he passed away in 1933. And he would reside in Chicago. But he would be seen hanging around after his training, obviously, in Grubb's gym. But Grubb's gym was a great gym. It brought up a lot of great black fighters. And Harry Smith was not the only black fighter who trained there. Now, Julius Williams, who trained at the Athletic Club, also trained at Grubb's gym. And he would become the colored middleweight champion. And as I stated, he would take on Harry Smith. Now, that was a big deal during that time, to have those two men meet each other. And the build-up to that fight was tremendous. Harry Smith and Jack McVeigh. Because both these men were capable of becoming middleweight champions of the world. But a man that would come out of that group would be William Landon Jones. His name was Gorilla Jones. Now, Gorilla Jones was born May 12th, 1906 in Memphis, Tennessee. He died January 4th, 1982 in Harlem, New York. He was 75 years of age at the time of his death. I had the pleasure of meeting William Gorilla Jones. He was something else. He stood 5'9", middleweight, 75-inch reach. And he met Mae West in 1928 at the age of 22 in a nightclub in New York. And he had earned some money, actually $100,000. And he placed that entire amount, 1929, in a nightclub. And this kind of did a lot of damage to the relationship between Mae West and William Gorilla Jones. But Jones would walk with a lion cub, with a pinstripe suit, shiny wingtip shoes. He had a gold pen sticking out of the necktie. And he had matching cufflinks, diamond rings, gold pocket watch with a gold chain hanging across the pocket, his back pocket, and his front, I guess where you would, you place your belt between the belt locks there. He also would have a cane that would have a lion's head made of gold. William Jones was something else, man. But he also trained in Grubb's gym. Now, the unfortunate situation with Jones was that he would take on Odon Piazza for the vacant middleweight championship strap that was vacated by Mickey Walker. Mickey Walker should have fought Harry Smith. He was offered thousands of dollars. He turned it down. And he left the middleweight division and he went up to the light heavyweight division. Now that created a tournament. 3 men were in the top 5 that were black. William Landon Gorilla Jones. You had the Harlem Thunderbolt Harry Smith. You also had Lynn Johnson. Lynn Johnson was from England. And he was part of that 3. Now, Walker would have had to fought one of them. And he did the hell with it, so he moved up to the light heavyweight division because he had in his contract, he was managed by Jack Kearns, that once he became the middleweight champion, he would not fight a black fighter. It's in his contract. And he refused to fight him. Although he fought Tiger Flowers for the middleweight championship strap, which arguably was a robbery to Tiger Flowers. Mickey Walker didn't win that fight, but they would give it to Mickey Walker. Now, also, Mickey Walker was a hell of a fighter. He didn't defeat Tiger Flowers, but he won the middleweight championship strap, and he didn't want to fight the three that I mentioned, so he moved up to the light heavyweight division. So Jones would become the middleweight champion, but he was robbed when he took on Marcel Theo, and they kept claiming low blows, and they would give the title for Marcel Theo. Now, I just wanted to show you Mickey Walker. He was from Elizabeth, New Jersey. He was a phenomenal welterweight champion, a good middleweight champion. He took on many great fighters out of his weight division. Jack Sharkey and Max Schmeling and Tommy Loughran. Many of them. But he had great fights with Jack Britton and Dave Shade, Soldier Griffith, and Soldier Barfield. He was in there with Artie Berg and Georgie Ward. He fought Steve Latzo, as well as Pete Latzo. He was in there with Bobby Green. Bobby Green was from Philadelphia, and he was a very good fighter. He was also in there with Jack Malone, Mike Mateague, Lefty Cooper, Harry Greb. Very good fighter was Mickey Walker, the Toy Bulldog. Remember when he fought Wildcat Nelson? What a fight that was. But he escaped the fight with Harry Greb. I'm sorry, the fight with Harry, the Harlem Thunderbolt, Harry Smith, and Lynn Johnson. Unfortunate. Now, I want you to take a look at Lynn Johnson, the English Flash. His name was Leonard Becker Johnson. Leonard Becker Johnson. Born October 22nd, 1902 in Manchester, United Kingdom. He died September 28th, 1974 in Manchester, United Kingdom. He was 71 years of age at the time of his death. He was managed by John Bull. Fought from 1920 to 1933. Had a total bout career of 135 fights. 95 wins, 36 knockouts, 33 losses, and 7 draws. Now, I want you to think about the time in which Lynn Johnson came. Tiger Jack Payne. He fought him Saturday, April 17th, 1920. Alabama Theater. And it was a large crowd. And he showed that he could fill a venue. He could punch and he could box. Tuesday, October 26, 1920. Scored a 10-round technical knockout over Marshall Hall. Now, here's the thing. He was in there with some great fighters. Roland Todd, Ted Kid Lewis. Defeated all of them. And Mickey Walker told him that if you fight Tommy Milliken and defeat him, I'll give you a shot. He knew that Lynn Johnson could not possibly fight Tommy Milliken. And Tommy Milliken would not fight Lynn Johnson. You see, Lynn Johnson came under the rule where you couldn't fight for a championship if you look like him. That was a rule. And so he was not allowed to fight for a title. So Mickey Walker escaped fighting Lynn Johnson. And Lynn Johnson would wind up becoming the British Empire middleweight champion. But he did it in Australia. He couldn't do it in his homeland, United Kingdom, because he was prohibited because of the color of his skin. But he fought Lynn Harvey, and Ted Kid Lewis, and Roland Todd, and Tiger Jack Payne, Billy Gypsy Daniels, Joe Bloomfield, Marcel Theo, Jack Walker. What a fighter Lynn Johnson was. And he would become the British Empire middleweight champion in boxing history. What a story that was for him. Now, I guess black fighters were mistreated, but in the 1940s, early 1940s, late 1930s, it became obvious what racism was for the black fighters. Now, here you would have Henry Armstrong in 1940. He was the welterweight champion of the world. He had Seferino Garcia, who was the world middleweight champion. I'm going to show it to you like this because I'm going to put this in my book once it's published. But this is Henry Armstrong and Seferino Garcia. It was for the world middleweight championship of the world. Henry Armstrong was the challenger. Seferino Garcia was the champion. And Armstrong was robbed. He was robbed by a referee at that time. His name was George Blake. Now, Henry Armstrong was the world welterweight champion in 1940. And he would take on Fizzy Zivic. And he would lose his title. But he would take on Seferino Garcia in California. And here you have George Blake, who took away 5 rounds from Armstrong. It was only a 10-round contest. And as far as I'm concerned, it was a job fight. It was definitely set up for Henry Armstrong not to win the middleweight championship in the NBA version of it. He clearly won the entire fight. And George Blake kept on taking rounds away from Henry Armstrong. Well, if you take 5 rounds away from a 10-round fight, you make it even. And that's what it was, a draw. He would run out of the arena trying to catch a cab. He'd be spotted and caught, brought back, and was charged and never allowed to referee another fight. And he confessed to what actually happened. He was paid off. And he feared for his life, as he stated so candidly. And that would ruin the legacy of Henry Armstrong becoming a 4-weight division champion. And that's just unfortunate, but that would not be the first time that would happen to black fighters. Now, 1940 would be a great year, but it was so obvious at this point of what was happening to the black fighters. Black Murderers Row would be in full effect. And you had some great fighters during that time. And that's what was so interesting about the Black Murderers Row. Because you had them all. You had some great, great names. And you're coming into a new era. You had Charlie Burley and Herman Williams. You had Coco Kidd and Burt Littell, Eddie Booker, Little Tiger Aaron Weed, Lloyd Marshall. We look at Charlie Burley. He was born September 6, 1917, Bismarck, Pennsylvania. He was one of 7 children, the only boy. He would defeat Herbert Lewis Hardwick, and Herman Williams. He would fight Fizzy Zivic 3 times, would lose the first one, and defeat him the other 2. He faced Archie Moore, April 21st, 1944. Jimmy Bivens, he would lose one, September 3rd, 1940. Faced Ezzard Charles twice, lost to him, May 25th, 1942. June 29th, 1942. We faced fighters such as Billy Seuss of Tacoma, Washington. Being there with Jack Chase. February 19th, 1943. April 6th, 1944. As well as September 11th. We take on Little Tiger Aaron Wade. August 20th, 1945. We win the California middleweight championship title. He be in the ring with Burt Littell twice. One win, one loss. August 5th, 1946. February 17th, 1947. He would take on Charlie Doc Williams. He would lose to him April 3rd, 1949. Lloyd Marshall. He would lose to him December 11th, 1942. He would defeat Jack Chase for the California Light Heavyweight Championship crown. Ezzard Charles, Ezzard Mac Charles, Herman Williams, two great ones. We'll continue the conversation in another video. I'm Scrapbook Boxing, Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuffs series. All great fights, all great fighters will never be forgotten on my channel. Shout out to the great fighters in the past. Thanks for watching. Peace.